In 1941, I graduated from high school and was planning to go to college at Colorado State in Fort Collins. It was a Colorado Agricultural College in those days, and starting in September. So I worked on the farm that summer, and on our farm, we raised crops in the summer and fattened sheep and cattle in the winter. In the month of August, we would haul the manure out of the corrals and spread it on the farm, what you could call real, genuine, organic farming. And so I was in the August session of that, and it was my responsibility to get the manure out of the corrals, spread on the farm. We had what we call a manure spreader, and we'd fill it up and then go spread it on the field and then go back and fill it again and do that. And so I was doing this by hand, and my dad, being a progressive farmer, a very progressive farmer, liked to find new equipment, and he wondered if he couldn't get a tractor or a loader mounted on our John Deere Model B tractor and load it faster. And he found a blacksmith who would do that, and they made it. And on Labor Day I was working, and they finished it and brought it out, and then Dad and the man put it on the tractor. And so they came out and gave it to me, and I loaded it with a big fork. And oh, you get so much on there and load the spreader in just a little bit of time. I did that, and I loaded it too high. I could get more on, I loaded way up, and there was too much weight on it, and I didn't realize that. And so I would take the horses, the horse team would be on that spreader, and I'd leave the corral and had a little trail in the farm. I'd go from field to field in the farm. And I was loaded so high I couldn't sit down. I'd load it up and then set a seat back, and I'd sit down and drive the horses. But this day I couldn't sit down, it was so loaded so high. I trotted the horses to try to get more done. And the road was quite bumpy, a little bumpy, the trail was. I was bouncing there, and all of a sudden that bounce caught a big sprocket wheel and put the spreader in gear and gave an awful lurch. And my standing up, I had nothing to hold on to. I just went off the spreader onto the tongue, which was that part of the spreader that went between the horses and to which the horses were hitched. And I landed on the tongue, and the horses spooked a bit and began to gallop. And we were moving fast. And I grabbed the harness of one horse and pulled myself up onto the tongue where I could stand. And my grandfather and father had always warned me, don't fool around with a runaway team. Get off the vehicle. And so all my thoughts were, get off of here. So I jumped. I missed. I didn't clear it. And I landed under the front wheel. Miraculously, that front wheel froze on my body and did not run over me. It dragged me. And the horses, their names were Bob and Dolly, and very good team. And they came to a stop. And I wiggled and got out from under that wheel. How I did it, I don't know. And my clothes were torn, my trousers almost torn off me, my shirt torn badly. And I got up, looked around, and I saw my straw hat lying behind the spreader. I went back and picked it up, and it was torn up, but I put it on. And I got on the spreader again and said, let's go, Bob and Dolly, and we'll unload this load. And I went on out and spread the and I was in a state of shock. And then I went back to the corral, but I was in such bad shock that I decided to go to the house. And my mother met me and saw something was wrong, and she helped me get in, got me in bed. I lay down. And then a couple of days later, I got so bad they decided they better get me to a doctor, which they had not done yet. And they took me to our doctor, and he said, you've got to go to the hospital, and put me in the Weld County Hospital in Greeley. And they diagnosed it. Every rib in my body was broken, and my left lung was collapsed, and the pleural cavity was filling with fluid. And so they called a doctor my dad had known as a boy, and they went to school together, and he'd gone and become a well-known doctor in Denver. Called him and asked him if he'd come up and look at me, and he did. And he met with my parents outside the room. When they came in, I could see they'd been crying. I was in an oxygen tent by then, and the doctor had told them I wouldn't live through the night, and said there was no surgery they could do. And he said, we'll use a new drug that may help, and it was sulfathiazole. I turned my head to the side, and I said, oh God, if there is a God, I wasn't sure. I didn't know. I went to church, but I didn't know that there was a God for sure. And if there is a God, please answer this prayer and give me health so that I can get a Bible and read it and see what I ought to believe, because I don't want to die like I am now. And so I prayed that prayer, and God, He did bring health back to me.